express their full talent, their full potential by the physical capacities. This is where the critical question of resources versus natural selection will take place. Effort time versus recovery time. That's what you're going to face. Hi everyone, and welcome to your sports physiotherapy course module. I am Lunis Brenneman. I'm physiotherapist and strength and conditioning coach. The purpose of the video of today is to expose you the biomechanical and functional demand in football in order for you to understand what to test, what to exercise, and when is your athlete ready to play after injury. Football, among the structured competition sports, is by far the most practiced in the world. More than 250 million players, billions of fans around the globe, with the main event being the World Cup. It's a sport that requires a lot of collective coordination and very high technical demand. To detect talent, recruiters may have specifications varying according to the culture of the club or the countries, but it's widely considered that by teenagehood, athletic development can still improve by about 30%, where technical qualities can improve by 5%. So when talent is detected, it is our role as physio and as strength and conditioning coach to try to express their full talent, their full potential by the physical capacities. The big lines of the performance profile of a football player are intermittent effort, alternating between walking, running, sprinting, jumping, and change of direction. Key components will be speed, agility, power, both anaerobic and aerobic endurance, and motor coordination. The match duration is 2 times 45 minutes plus extra time, which has a strong impact on the fatigue accumulation. Quick and sharp decision making under pressure will be also a big component of the performance. And to stay aware of your exteroception, what's going around you, with your opponents, with your partner, raise the ball, your body alarms should be under control with a great physical condition. Effort time versus recovery time. That's what you're going to face in a football match. The activity distribution is spread as such: 24 to 28% of the time to run or sprint, 60 to 70% of the time to walk or jog, and 10% of the time just standing to make your anticipation work and positioning. The frequency of intense actions such as sprints, change of directions, jumps, or duels is very high. In average, a professional player makes between 1200 and 400 changes of activity per game. 150 to 250 high-intensity run over 20 km per hour, 30 to 50 sprints over 25 km per hour, and 100 to 200 change of direction. And the average time between those intense efforts is between 30 to 90 seconds, depending on the position of the player, which ultimately will lead to a partial recovery and an accumulation of fatigue. In a full match, the distance covered is about 10 to 12 kilometers per player, including 2.4 kilometers at moderate to high intensity and 2 to 400 at very high intensity. We are talking here about sprints that last in average about 8 meters. The key movements that are found in football and their associated risks. First of all, of course, the sprint, with the change of direction and agility involved. This will work on the hamstrings, quadriceps, calves, iliopsoas, lumbopelvic core, and more. And of course, the push-off phase, the deceleration, slowing down quickly, pivots with the shoe staying stuck on the grass, and the relaunch will be the most loading on the knees, ankles, and soft tissue involved, and especially to the hamstrings. Another key movement will be the shooting and long distance passing. It will require an upward segmental coordination, so starting from the support of the contralateral leg and the inertia, you will get the transfer of strength through the trunk, hip, knee, ankle, and finally to the foot. The typical risks associated are the pubalgia, which is an umbrella term that will include all inflammations or damage of all tissues of the groin, lower abdomen, and inner thighs region. If you think about the passes or the shots or long distance shoots with high power, high velocity, they are usually aiming to a direction and are multiplanar, very complex movements. That makes it very difficult to assess what structure is engaged and to isolate the damaged structures. If we see, for example, a purely sagittal plane movement, the hip flexors can be very much involved, or it can be any weaker link of the chain, such as an unstable ankle, for example. The next key movement would be the header and the aerial duels. To jump, you will involve the triple extension, hip, knee, and ankle. You will have in the air necessity to have a great aerial core that differs from the static and dynamic core that we know. This is a kind of core you will find in gymnastics, in volleyball, except that in football you can be under two external forces while you're flying, which are the opponents and of course the ball. Proprioception is another component very important to land safely and economically, beside the visual entry that will be necessary to anticipate where the player is going to land. And the typical risks are more associated to the landing than the jumping itself, and especially the sprains of the ankle. Concussion is also an important risk during the duels, the hits in the head. And speaking about the traumatic events, of course, how not to mention the tackles and the ankle and knee sprains that they will lead to. How is the physio going to impact the prevention for the traumatic events? That's very hard to say and very hard to measure. Of course, the player could always change his way to play. You can train with multiple tasks, such as observing the environment while performing technical movements. However, reaching a certain amount of power, strength, and velocity, there is no motor control or observation skills that can make up the trauma. To sum up, the typical injuries you will find will be the hamstrings injuries, typically during the sprints, the ankle and knee sprains, typically during the sharp change of directions, tackles, the pubalgia, due to overuse or muscle disbalance in the areas that we mentioned earlier, and the concussions. How to prevent these typical injuries found in football? Well, you need to start with the basics of hydration, nutrition, and sleep. Give clear guidelines to your players about what time they should go to sleep and how to eat before and after the training. Later on, you get to know your player. If some problems are recurring with the digestive comfort, for example, investigate what can be improved and try to remove the problematic elements. Of course, you will need to have a structured warm-up before the trainings, but also before the games. We warmly recommend you to look at the FIFA 11 Plus program that has been greatly studied. Also, please watch our pre-season and in-season training of the FC Yachts videos. The eccentric work of the hamstring is very important component. You can use exercises such as the Nordic hamstring curl. Make sure that you're strengthening the hamstrings also in the last half of the exercise where the knee is almost extended. You can work also the hamstrings in different modalities such as isometrics, in knee flexion, or in hip extension. Remember that nothing can prepare the hamstrings better than the sprints itself, so implement gradually more and more sprints with higher and higher intensity. The angular velocity of the knee extension in a sprint can reach 1000 degrees per second, and the main structure that should slow that down while reaching the full extension is the hamstrings, not the ACLs and not the joint capsule. You have to get your players to work on proprioception, various dynamic core modalities, and controlled mobility. And when I talk about mobility, I'm talking about all the fundamentals that it involves. The flexibility, the ability to go through a wide range of motion, the strength associated to it, to be able to be active in this full range of motion, and to complete the mobility picture, you need to have motor control. Your brain has to know how to perform the movement safely and efficiently. You should be able to track the recovery and the training load of your players. You can use technology such as GPS. You can also count, for example, how many jumps or how many sprints are done during the session. And of course, you can have also subjective measurement and asking the perceived rate of exertion from your players. Using protective equipment can be also crucial. In football, there is the great known protection for the tibia, or eventually a helmet for the goalkeeper. In top level, the psychosocial component is affecting performance. In football, you can sustain a very high collective pressure from the staff, from your teammate, from the public, from the media, and that will affect the performance of the player. In case of long-term injuries, such as ACL or Achilles tendon rupture, ensure an emotional management and try not to isolate the player from the rest of the team. The social status of your player will also have an impact on their motivation, if they're amateur or professional, on the pressure that they sustain to manage that psychosocial components in top sport. The role of the physio and the coach will be active listening, motivation, communication, as well as within the technical staff itself. These, of course, are very taxing in energy. It's, of course, a greatly ethical questions and philosophical question with no answer, but you've got to decide what kind of resources are given to this or this player. And this is where the critical question of resources versus natural selection will take place. If you are in an environment where there are a lot of players available and the players are easily replaced, most of the time there will be less resources given to the players. If, in another hand, the environment is so that there are few players, few great players of good qualities, of course more resources will be given to them to make sure that the psychosocial components are under control. Of course, the multidisciplinary approach is another component very important depending on the budget of the club. Knowing these basics, what does it mean for the physiotherapist? What does it mean for the strength and conditioning coach? The physiotherapist should manage the surveillance of muscle imbalances, of course should do the specific rehabilitation after an injury for shooting, change of direction, deceleration, sprinting. The physiotherapist should ensure also the secondary prevention after injury, make functional tests, improve the neuromuscular control and the self-confidence of the player to be ready to play again. The strength and conditioning part can be done with the physio or another staff member, depending on the budget of the club, will ensure the development of specific physical components, such as power, that is usually given in watts, it's strength multiplied by time. It's usually measured with functional exercises, just like a counter movement jump. Explosivity, that is oftentimes confused with the power, is measured in milliseconds and will translate a rate of force development. It can be usually measured with a force plate. So how much time does it take to develop the maximal strength? And of course, 10 to 12 kilometers per match will require also endurance and VO2 max. The maximal aerobic speed test is oftentimes used, and you can use a formula to translate it into VO2 max. Remember that the formula to translate maximal aerobic speed into VO2 max is possible, but having the VO2 max cannot translate into a maximal aerobic speed. Indeed, if you run, you do have a cardiovascular system, and in case of a decent running technique, it's pretty reliable to translate it into VO2 max. But if you measure the VO2 max with another tool, you may not be able to translate it into maximal aerobic speed, because you can have an individual with a cardiovascular system but not the locomotion required to run. It's the role of the SNC coach to individualize the planification, consider the medical history of the players while training them. Altogether, between the rehabilitation and reathletization, there should be a close cooperation between the physio and the head coach. The calendar must be clear, the return to play must be addressed, and the mesocycle loading should be planned. To sum up, football combines multifactorial constraints such as technical, physical, and mental components. The biomechanical knowledge of it and of the player will allow a targeted prevention, rehabilitation, and optimized performance more effectively. The multidisciplinary approach is crucial, and the physio cannot help the athlete the best he can without the rest of the staff. We hope this video clarified for you what are the needs of football players. Please go through the references proposed at the end of the video and comment this content with your classmates. See you next time.